Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. I've got a new rifle scope that I want to review for you today, but to put this review in context, I first want to talk a little bit about some trends in the optics industry that I, as a patriotic American, find maybe a little bit concerning. Specifically, there's been some real turnover in the market leadership within the optics industry. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted a quality scope, you probably bought a Leupold. If you wanted a scope-shaped object that didn't cost any more than absolutely necessary, you probably bought a Tasco. And if you wanted sort of a balance of quality and value, you probably went with a Bushnell. Yes, there were other options, but I think those were sort of the three clear market leaders, again, 20, 30 years ago. Well, fast forward to today, and if you want a quality optic, you probably get a Vortex Razor. If you want a balance of quality and value, you probably still get a Vortex, but one of their cheaper product lines like the Diamondback or the Crossfire. And if you just want a scope-shaped object, then there's a zillion different options out there that we'll talk more about in a minute. But the difference here is that Leupold, Bushnell, and Tasco are all basically American companies. Granted, Bushnell and Tasco probably outsourced a lot of their manufacturing overseas, but the product design, the technical expertise behind their products was all based here in the US. Whereas Vortex, from what I understand, is a wholly Chinese company. You know, all of their technical expertise for design and engineering and manufacturing is in China. Their US company branch, such as it is really just a distribution front for products that are developed and manufactured in China. Now, of course, Leupold and Bushnell are still around, they're still selling scopes, but they've lost that position of market leadership because while there's certainly people who have brand loyalty to Leupold, for example, a lot of people are looking at the options and saying, well, you know, a Vortex Razor has every bit the reputation for reliability and quality that Leupold scopes do, and you get a comparable product at a cheaper price. So why wouldn't I go with the Vortex? I think I can speak for a lot of Americans in saying that I like to buy American-made products. I like to support our local and national industry, but I don't have either the money or the interest in subsidizing inefficient manufacturing. And when a product costs more, sometimes that can be an indication of higher quality because they're incurring more cost on better materials or something. More often than not, it's just indicative of a company using inefficient, perhaps outdated manufacturing methods and having to charge more because they're not making their products efficiently. And so that's where I'm concerned that when it appears that the Chinese optics industry is matching American optics quality at a much lower price point, that's probably indicative that our indigenous optics manufacturing capability has fallen behind and that we need to close that technological gap somehow. Because first we see a Chinese company like Vortex displacing American companies like Leupold and Bushnell as the clear market leader. And now I'm wondering if we're seeing even another transition to generic Chinese products beginning to displace the sort of quasi-branded Chinese products like Vortex. And that is where this comes in. This is a totally generic rifle scope, specifically a scout scope, as you can see by how far forward it's mounted on the gun here. I'm not going to do an unboxing video. As you can see, I've already mounted it on the gun, but I did want to show you the box. It is just a generic rifle scope box. I mean, it's clearly a scope box, but there is absolutely no identifying information with a brand or a make and model or anything like that. Now, you might point out that, well, If it's a generic scope, then there's no known manufacturer standing behind it. So there's no manufacturer's warranty. What's to say that this scope isn't absolute garbage? And what's the allure to buying a scope that doesn't have a company standing behind it? And the allure is that it's dirt cheap. This is a $35 scope compared to, well, you know, a loopholed scout scope similar to this would cost $500+. A Vortex, $150+. So even for the cost of a Vortex, I could get almost 5 of these. Now, both Loopold and Vortex use their customer base as their final level of quality control. They expect to ship a few defective products that customers will catch, and then they have a customer service department to make sure that those defective products get repaired or replaced. Well, with this, I don't have a warranty or a customer service department to refer to if it's defective, but I can buy 2 or 3 of them and still come out ahead relative to buying a Loopold or a Vortex. And so if the scope is basically good quality, or if most of them are basically good quality, it's still going to be a cheaper option, even if I occasionally have to buy my own replacement. So then the question becomes, well, for $35, what am I actually getting? Is this basically a good quality scope? Or is it basically a piece of garbage, a scope-shaped object that would be suitable for decorating an airsoft gun or a movie prop that you might use for live-action role-playing, but not suitable to put on a real firearm that you're really going to shoot? So that's what I hope to find out today. I'm going to take this scope out to the range, do a little bit of testing with it, and bring you guys along to see the results of that testing. Okay, so what do you actually get for $35? Well, you get the scope itself, obviously. It does come with scope rings, which, you know, if you bought a Loopold, you'd probably pay more than $35 just for the rings. So, again, the fact that they're included is part of the economics of this package, and you get these elastic scope cap covers. They are see-through covers, by the way, which is nice. You know, maybe I should back up a minute and say, you know, because you might be wondering, if this is a generic scope, then where did I even find it? Where did I get it? How do I identify it? Well, I got it on eBay, and it was marketed as a, quote, Mosin-Nagant scope. I wonder if that's kind of the Soviet bloc terminology for what we would call a scout scope. The term scout scope, of course, was coined by Jeff Cooper, who also more or less invented the concept, at least as we understand it here in the West. But the Mosin-Nagant, of course, was a Soviet bloc rifle whose design was such that you couldn't really mount a scope on top of the receiver like we'd mount a scope on top of a typical American bolt-action hunting rifle. So if you wanted to put a scope on a Mosin-Nagant, it would have to be either a scout scope, you know, mounted ahead of the receiver, or possibly something mounted up real high on some sort of a side-mounted plate. So anyway, so that's what that's the closest I can come to giving you a make and model, is that it is a generic quote-unquote Mosin-Nagant scope that I got on eBay. Now, as far as overall first impressions, just based on the look and feel of the scope, overall, it looks really good. I remember, I think it was the mid-10 scope that I reviewed that had some things that were loose that I had to like glue in place, or I want to say it was a Nico Sterling that I reviewed once that, like, just as soon as I took it out of the package, I had a sinking feeling about it, and then looking through it, I could see that the crosshairs were like canted to the side, and yeah, I've reviewed some scopes that were pretty bad. I'm not getting any of those negative first impressions with this one. You know, the anodization looks as good as what I would expect on like a Bushnell or a Vortex. Everything looks crisp and tight. You know, taking the the adjustment cap off. You know, the elevation adjustment here gives me really nice, positive, audible clicks. So it feels like something that would be, you know, something I can adjust precisely and that should hold a 0. You know, the optical clarity, you know, looking through it looks like a real nice, sharp, clear picture. No tinting or anything like that. So, yeah, overall first impressions are really positive. Not sure how well this is going to work, but let me see if I can actually give you a view through the scope on the camera. Okay, there we go. I'm not sure how well you can really see any of that. But, I mean, basically it's a good, clear scope picture. You know, no complaints with the optical clarity. It really looks pretty comparable to other Scout scopes that I've used. In fact, for comparison, I've got my Vortex out here. So, we'll see if I can give you a view through the Vortex. This one, because it's bufferless, I can at least get it a little closer to the camera. That may help. There we go. Yeah, so there's the Vortex. And then here's my Burris. I don't know how well the camera is going to focus on the picture through the scope, but for what it's worth, there's my attempt to do a direct comparison. I won't know until I review the footage what you could actually see on the camera there or whether it was useful, but looking through all 3 scopes side by side myself, what I noticed was that, you know, the optical clarity across all 3 was really pretty comparable. I wasn't noticing any significant differences there. The Vortex Scout scope, I find, has a pretty restrictive eye box. You know, you have to have your eye precisely behind the scope in order to see anything through it. Whereas the Burris has a much more generous eye box. You can see through it a lot easier, but there's sort of a spherical aberration, like, you know, as you move your eye around behind the scope, you can see the landscape or the picture through the scope sort of distorting. So, whereas with this one, it's closer to the Vortex, but, you know, kind of intermediate. I think, if anything, the eye box is a little bit more generous than the Vortex, but I'm not seeing any of that spherical aberration, that distortion that I get with the Burris. But enough with preliminaries. Let's do some shooting and see if we can actually zero this scope, because I've had optics in the past that were so bad that the 0 would wander so much you couldn't even really get them zeroed. I'm curious to see if that's the case with our $35 generic scope here. Oh, and just in case anybody's interested, the gun that I've got this scope mounted on is obviously an AR-15 pistol, chambered in 300 blackout, 10.5-inch barrel, and I'm going to be shooting 110 grain polymer-tipped supersonic rounds. I've actually got a separate video talking specifically about these loads if anybody wants to go down that rabbit hole. Well, at 25 yards, it looks like our horizontal 0 is pretty good, and vertically we're shooting about 2 inches low, which is probably about equal to our height over bore. So I'm going to move the target out to 100 yards and see if we can get some shots on paper at that distance. Okay, so it was about 2 inches low at 25 yards. I figured that was close enough to get on paper at 100, so I moved the target out to 100 without adjusting the scope. Next group was about 4 inches low at 100 yards, so I adjusted the elevation at 16 clicks up. That should be 4 inches if they're quarter-minute clicks. Let's see what it does. Okay, so that group was centered about 1 inch high and 1 inch to the right at 100 yards, but it also opened up to like a 4-inch group. The others were about 2 or less. So I don't know if that's just me or if something is wandering. I'm going to repeat the group and see if I can shoot better. But one thing I was noticing is that it doesn't seem like I can zoom in as far to see the target better with this scope. So comparing it to my others, these are all labeled as 2 to 7 power scopes, both this one and the Vortex and the Burris. But on this one, if I zoom out to 2 power, or what's labeled as 2 power, it's actually a non-magnifying optic. It's like an LPVO. And if I zoom into maximum power, what's labeled as 7, it's pretty comparable to 4 power on the other scopes. So it's labeled as 2 to 7, but it's actually 1 to 4. That does not inspire confidence in the people that designed this scope. At the same time, if it's a good scope, I'm sure there's a market niche for a 1 to 4 power scout scope, because I'm not aware of any long eye relief, scout style LPVOs on the market, except for this one that is not marketed as such. Anyway, let's shoot another group and see if we can do better. Okay, so that time I was able to shrink the group down to about 2.5 inches, still centered at exactly the same spot, about 1 inch high and 1 inch to the right at 100 yards. I think I want to keep it about 1 inch high at 100 yards. That's probably a good place to zero it, but I did adjust the windage to hopefully move that back to center horizontally. So let's do one more and see if we got that centered properly this time. Well, those last 3 shots were inside a solid 1-inch group at 100 yards, but now it was centered about 1.25 inches to the left. So I moved the windage about halfway back, and we'll try again. Okay, that last 3-shot string was another 1 inch to 1.5 inches group at 100 yards, and this one was centered about 1.25 inches high by about 1/4 inch to the left. But as you've probably noticed more than I have, there's been a little bit of a breeze come up, and the breeze in this case blowing from right to left across the range, so that 1/4 inch of drift to the left could be the wind, or it could be the scope, or it could be me. So at this point I think I'm going to call it good. I'm going to put up a clean target and fire a 5-shot group for validation purposes, and then we'll see if we can knock over the steel that's down there, and while I'm at it I'll turn the camera downrange and see if I can zoom in enough that you can actually see what's going on down there. Well, I didn't have any trouble knocking over that steel. Let's see what we've got on paper. Well, okay, that definitely opened up a little bit relative to those 1-inch groups I was shooting. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 centered about 1 inch high at 100 yards, which is the 0 I was going for. Which brings us to our next question of whether or not the scope will hold a 0. So I'm going to mark these so that we know what we fired in this group. And then we're going to bounce the scope around a little bit and shoot another group and see how they compare. Okay, so the weapon is clear. As you can see, I've removed the magazine, nothing in the chamber. I've got it placed on a little piece of carpet on top of a piece of plywood, and we're gonna shake it up a little bit. Carpet's moving around on me. Let's try turning that over. About the worst case scenario for shock and vibration that I would reasonably want or expect a scope to withstand would be if I put it on the floor in a pickup truck behind the seat and drove over a bumpy road. And typically if I was planning on doing that, I'd have the gun in a padded case or something, but worst case scenario, maybe it just gets stuck down on the floorboards there. And I think that what we've done here, shaking it around on that board, is sort of a simulation of that that's probably a lot more severe in terms of the accelerations to which the gun and the scope are actually subjected. So if it held a 0 for that, then it will probably hold a 0 for anything that I would reasonably do with it in normal service. Well, that is an interesting result. So it does look like the group shifted. It shifted right about 1.5 inches straight up, which is surprising because the way I was shaking the gun, most of the impact was directed along the windage axis, and so if anything, I would have expected it to shift the point of impact horizontally. And yet we don't see any shift in the horizontal 0. We only see a slight vertical shift, which, I mean, really, if we just combined all this, we're still in like a 4.5 inch group. Is it possible that maybe I was holding a little higher on this group? You know, could this all be user error? Did the scope really shift? If it did shift, you know, is that much difference enough to matter? And would it actually shift that much or more in any real life scenario? I don't know. It's kind of an inconclusive result. Okay, let's just fire one more group and see if that tells us anything. Well, okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4. I forget which of these was from the previous group, but 5 up there somewhere. So, what does that tell us? I mean, this group is shifted 2.5 inches to the left. Does that mean the scope is wandering? Or am I wandering? Okay, so I got to thinking there's basically 2 possibilities here. One possibility is that the apparent shift in point of impact is all due to environmental factors and maybe user error. I've never had another scope on this particular gun, at least since I put a new barrel in it, so I don't really know what level of accuracy or precision this setup is capable of or what I should expect out of it. If this is like a 4 to 6 minute gun on this setup with this rest and so forth, then it's entirely possible that these 1-inch groups that we're seeing are just statistical anomalies, and because I'm only firing 3 to 5 shots at a time, I appear to get a group here and a group here and a group here, when if I fired a 100-shot group, it would all just be one more uniform group. Then again, like I say, there's environmental factors. When I did the shake test, of course, I took the magazine out of the gun, and then I went to find some plywood and did the test and so forth. And the whole time, this black magazine is sitting out in full sun, probably heating up quite a bit, which when you take some ammunition and you heat it up, you typically increase the muzzle velocity a little bit, which potentially could cause it to impact the target higher because it's not dropping as much as the bullet goes downrange. So that could explain at least part of the apparent vertical shift in the point of impact. Again, the wind has been shifting all over the place this morning. It'll come from one direction and then another direction and another direction. So one possibility is that the scope is great and it's all just environmental factors. Another possibility is that when we shook up the scope, we actually loosened something, we shook something loose, and so now the point of impact is shifting randomly as we're shooting, and that's, that there is a real physical problem that's causing these groups to shift around. And I've seen optics do that, where, something comes loose, and, every time you fire a group to try and zero it, the group shifts, and you just can't keep up with it, and ultimately you can't get it to hold a zero. So what I did off camera is I re-zeroed the scope to be shooting, about an inch high, horizontally centered at 100 yards. I got it to fire a 5-shot group that seemed consistent with that zero. Then I went and ran a couple of magazines through it, just doing kind of the run and gun in the trenches with some steel targets, basic target practice, and now we're going to go ahead and repeat our 5-shot group and see if the zero has shifted noticeably. Because if it's still zeroed after doing a bunch of shooting, then I'm going to say it was probably just environmental factors. If the group has shifted noticeably after that shooting, then there's a good chance that we shook something loose when we were doing our shake test. Okay, moment of truth. Well, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, okay, so this is our new group. This was the group I shot before. I'm not seeing much of a shift, if any. It's not a great group. I'm probably getting a little bit tired. Okay, results and conclusions. Conclusion number 1, this scope is definitely not garbage. Is it the best scope that was ever made? Probably not. It is a little disconcerting that they mislabeled the magnification, but overall it looks and functions pretty well. We didn't have any trouble zeroing it. It's debatable if it really passed our shake test, but it certainly didn't really fail the shake test. I mean, if we'd shaken it up and then couldn't get shots on paper, that would have been a clear failure. As it is, we shook it up. The point of impact seemed to shift about 2 MOA or less, which could be explained by shooter error and environmental factors and so forth, or could have represented a small shift in the scope itself. And after I re-zeroed it, it seemed to be holding that new zero properly. It didn't seem to be continuing to drift as though we'd broken something loose inside the scope that was causing it to shift at random, as I was concerned might have been the case, because I've seen things like that happen on other optics. So in general, I feel like this is a viable optic for use on real guns that you're actually going to use. Now, yes, it would be prudent to check your zero from time to time and make sure that the scope is still zeroed where you want it. That's probably a prudent thing to do with any scope, no matter how much you paid for it. In fact, I think this test kind of begs the question, would a Vortex Scout scope have fared any better in our testing today than this one did? Now, am I willing to subject my Vortex scope that costs 5 times more than this to the same kind of testing? I don't know about that. But my very hesitance to subject my Vortex scope to the same kind of testing that we put this one through tells you that I'm not all that confident that it would pass with flying colors. Intuitively, I don't know that this scope is in any way inferior to a Vortex or a Bushnell or even a Leupold, other than the fact that the magnification is mislabeled. So the bottom line is that this seems like a pretty functional scope for $35, which leads me to conclusion number 2, namely that I'm concerned that the American optics industry is in deep trouble. I mean, remember how Leupold acquired the Redfield brand and started using it to market a more affordable line of optics? Well, if I was CEO of Leupold right now, I would be telling my underlings that, look, we need to refine our manufacturing process to the point where our Redfield optics are retailing for under $50 and we're still making a profit. Because, I mean, this is a $35 scope. Rule of thumb in marketing is that customers will pay up to 30% more for a comparable product. If it's backed by a company that they trust, they'll pay up to 30% of the price for reputation points, basically. So, $35, add 30%, you're $48-ish dollars. If I could get a $48 scope from Leupold or Redfield that came with their warranty and their reputation, that would compete effectively with something like this. But if that's not possible, then that implies that American optics manufacturing technology has fallen significantly behind the Chinese, which is concerning. So, yeah, not a bad scope, but kind of a sobering picture. In any case, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.